Hey everybody, this video is going to be regarding assembly of the Ground Zero Add-a-stage tube gain stage PCB board. Just a couple of tips and tricks on how to install this or assemble this. The specific areas being the tube socket area, how to wire the heaters with these jumpers here, and then we'll talk a little bit about installing the relay, which is pretty simple, nothing too complicated. But everything else on this board is pretty simple and straightforward to assemble. All the resistors and capacitors and stuff like that should be very easy for anybody with enough experience to be installing this in the first place to figure out. As far as layout, schematics, values, if you go to my website, groundzeroamps.com, I've got a page called Add-a-stage assembly info or assembly guide. And that's gonna have schematics, layouts, values, all the information you need to populate all these components here. If you haven't bought one already assembled, if you want to build it from the bare board. So the first thing we're going to talk about is installing the tube socket itself. So you have your 9 pins here for your electrical connection of your tube socket. There's 2 additional holes in this board. One is here, that's a solder pad, and that's going to be for this standoff and tube pin here. That's going to go through that little hole and be soldered on to be connected to the board. Other side, you have this hole here. There's nothing in it. We're going to use a screw, a nylon spacer, and a nut to assemble it to the board using this hole here. This doesn't have a solder pad or anything. It's just a through hole. That's what we're going to use for that screw. So you have these 2 connections here. They're going to mechanically hold the tube socket to this board. Makes for a really strong connection. So with a shielded PCB mount tube socket, you get the benefit of, for one, having a base that accepts a tube shield if you want to put one on from the top afterwards, which I find useful for the extra stage. And you also have the mechanical connections here that make it stronger than just, soldering it from the pins. You can also use just a regular standard PCB mount tube socket. This is commonly used in a lot of amps. Like a Mesa rectifier, for example, has these installed in it. And they're just soldered straight to the PCB board, and that's what holds it in, is just the 9 solder joints, nothing else. So it doesn't have a base for a shield on it. It requires a smaller hole in the chassis if that's a concern for you. I can't see a scenario where it really would make a difference. But if you want the smaller hole, you can use this tube socket, and I'll show you later on what the difference in the hole sizes are going to be. So let's install our shielded tube socket. We're going to take a screw. All these part numbers and sizes and everything are, like I said, are on the Add-a-stage assembly guide on my website. All the information for the size of the screws and the spacers and stuff like that. So we put the screw through that hole in the base. I'll hold it in with my finger in my left hand if you're right-handed. If you're not, do it with your other hand. Then take your nylon spacer, put it over the threads of that screw. What I'm going to do is focus on this little pin on this standoff, and then we're going to put it into that hole there, but from the back side. Okay, so focus on that, turn the board around, and it's going to be that little pad right there. So I'm going to focus on putting that in that hole. At the same time, so we're going to stick that right there. At the same time, I'm going to line up the other 9 pins into their holes. And I'm also lining up the screw and the nylon spacer into the hole right here, okay? So that's all through the board now. I'm gonna grab my nut. I'm gonna thread it onto the screw that we put through. Okay, I'm just gonna loosely tighten that down by hand. Okay, now nothing's gonna fall out, everything's being held in, and you can see the connection and how it works. So screw, spacer, nut here, and then just the standoff here that goes to that solder pad. Okay, so once I have that loosely tightened down, I'm going to grab my Phillips screwdriver, and I'm going to tighten this screw here while just holding the nut with my finger from the backside, and it'll get pretty tight. Just make it firm. Don't make it, over tighten it or anything like that, but just so it holds. So you can see, even without soldering anything and just this installed and the standoff, it's really solid, and the tube socket doesn't even move. So it's nice having that mechanical connection. Next thing to be concerned with on installing the tube is on this nut, there's numerous peaks on the nut, right? Like these little pointy portions of the nut. You want that pointy portion to be pointing directly between pins 4 and 5. So I can see that mine is not doing that. So I'm gonna grab a nut driver and just back it off a little bit to where it does. And now I've got it to where that peak is right between pins 4 and 5. Okay, and that's gonna create the most amount of room around the nut from the pin socket so they don't ground out and touch once they're soldered on. Okay, so that's it. That's installed, and then you're gonna solder your 9 tube pins, and then it'll be completely installed. So I'm gonna take this back out. Let's take the nut and this off. Okay, and then I'll show you how to install this one. This one's super simple. It's just got the 9 solder pins. So you'll turn it over. You'll find your 9 holes. I just referenced the gap here in the pins. Find the gap here, stick it in there, and that's it. That's how it installs. And you just solder the 9 pins here, and it's held in, and that's how it works. Okay. Let me show you the difference in the hole sizes. So with the shielded tube socket, you're going to need a hole this size here. This is 30 millimeters or about 1 3/8 inches. Okay, I just use a step bit when I'm drilling holes in chassis. I have one that goes to 1 3/8 inches, and that makes a perfect hole for the shielded socket. If you're using the non-shielded, it's 25 millimeters or about 1 inch. It's significantly smaller. But again, I can't really think of, I guess there may be some scenarios where you're close to an edge of a chassis or something, maybe, I don't know, where it might not fit, but I think even then it's still, the board's got to fit, so you wouldn't be able to make it anyway. So I don't see a lot of scenarios, just thinking out loud, about where you want the smaller hole over the larger one, unless it just bothers you drilling out more material, but you know, either way. So you can use whatever you want. Next thing on the board is wiring the tube heaters. Okay, so with regular AC heaters, you'll just tap into your previous tube, and you run leads from each side of your heaters. And you know, on a typical AC tube heaters, you're gonna have pin 9 on one side, and you're gonna have 5 and 4 tied together. And that's your 2 connections, right? So you'll run one lead to VXP9 right here on the board, and that connects to pin 9, so that's your one connection. And then you're gonna run your second lead, just put it into VXP5, and then this jumper here, these 2 little pads where it says 6.3V JMP for jumper, you just run a small lead there in between it and solder it, and that ties pin 5 and 4 together. So you just need to put one lead here, tie this in, and then you have these tied together and your pin 9 wired. And that's all you need to do for AC heaters. If you're running DC heaters, you're going to use VXP5 and VXP4. So that's pin 5 and 4. You disregard pin 9, obviously, if you're running DC heaters. Now, the other nice thing about this is on pin 4, you can tie this jumper together where it says 12 volt JMP jumper. Tie that together, and that's going to take this pin 4 and put it to the DCN on the relay. Okay, so you want to run your positive side of your heaters to pin 4. If you're running DC heaters, jump here and it'll run that to your relay to power your relay. So you won't have to run extra leads and excess wiring. It's all tied in the board. If you don't want to do it that way, you have a V plus pad here that also does the same thing. It will give power to the relay. Again, it's cleaner to run it this way over here. Lastly, really the only other thing to talk about is just when you're installing these relays, just tips on that is to just install it from the top of the board, because they don't stay in by themselves, right? When you put them in the solder pads, put it in, hold it with your finger, and turn it over. And what I do is stick some solder onto my soldering iron, a good amount, and then just touch it to, I just use this little terminal and pad until it grabs, and then let it go. And then the relay will hold in the board. You can let go, it'll stay in, and then you can solder the other ones like normal. And then always come back to that first one that you solder, just to hold it and touch that up so it's nice and clean. And just make sure you don't have cold solder joints here. It's easy to do. And make sure that every one of these pins, all 8 of them, are soldered. It's easy to miss 2 of them, and just solder the 6 of them. Other than that, that's about it. Everything else is pretty straightforward as far as assembling it. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, groundzeroamps@gmail.com, or reference the assembly guide on my website, groundzeroamps.com.